and welcome back to another episode of Business Ethics Walk the Talk. I am your host, Blake Peterson, and I am so excited to share our next guest with you today. It's been a few years running. We've been talking about getting her on the show, and now the day is finally here. So she's actually the executive director of the Business Ethics Alliance. Obviously, the Alliance is the ones who I partner with for this podcast. We are very, very excited to have her back. Her name is Marie Marlier. She's a Ph.D., so Dr. Marie. But I don't know, she's never introduced herself that way to me. But once again, we seem to have a great record of PhDs coming on the show, so let's just keep that rolling. Marie received her doctorate of philosophy from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and she has her master's in education. So she's an educator at heart, no doubt about that. She came on to the Alliance just a couple years ago, was hired on in a role, I think as a programming director role, and within about 2 weeks, she became the executive director. So it's a very interesting time for her. She has done fantastic work since then. She's worked very hard on rebuilding a community around the Business Ethics Alliance here within Omaha. She's been incredibly supportive of this program and other programs. We're trying to further reach more audiences and give our programming legs from the Alliance to reach more business ethics conversations to more and more ears across the globe. So can't wait to have her on. Really excited for you to listen to it. And she's got a lot of very, very interesting things to say. So I hope you enjoy. Marie, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate you coming downtown and recording with us here at Webberized Studio. How are you doing? You look fantastic.
Thank you so much. It has been an amazing couple of days, actually an amazing week and an incredible year overall. And I just got done having breakfast with a valued mission driver contact and got to know her and the organization much better. It was a phenomenal conversation and just led to some great outcomes. So
good way to start the day.
It's a great way to start the day.
Yeah. Well, that's your job obviously as the executive director of the Business Ethics Alliance, doing a lot of activities like that, but you did not start necessarily in this space. You didn't join the Business Ethics Alliance with this goal in mind of becoming the executive director, right? So maybe we can give the people some background on where you come from as an educator, everything that kind of led to you moving into this space and how you eventually became the ED of the Business Ethics Alliance.
Sure. And it's interesting that you mentioned, kind of all roads leading to a certain place, because that was one of the topics of conversation at breakfast this morning with this colleague. And we were talking that in many careers, if you are able to pay attention to what, I'll just say, the universe is telling you, those roads, even though they might seem like they're taking a big detour or whatever, when you reflect back and have the opportunity to do that, you'll start to see those connections. And that's one of my Clifton strengths is connectedness. So I am always, how do I connect people? How do I connect concepts? How do I think bigger? Because I truly believe that in some way, shape, or form, we're all connected, whether it's through our experiences, through our families, through our friends, through our communities. There's always a sense of connection, and I think that's what's really important at the Business Ethics Alliance is finding that ethical community and building those connections as an ethical community with the hope that that's going to ripple then out to others.
Right.
So that's the short version. The slightly longer version is I'm not an Omaha native, so I've come to learn and appreciate and adopt Omaha. I'm a Wisconsin girl. I talked at our event yesterday about, yes, I've had cows lick my face before, and when Mother Nature threw her little temper tantrum earlier in January, I go, yep, that's just par for January.
Yep.
But I've wanted to be an educator since I'm 5 years old. I come from a family of clergy and social workers and teachers. So that human connection is just ingrained in me. And I originally wanted to be a professor of medieval literature.
Okay.
Those books that make people's eyes roll back in their head. But I also wanted to eat, and I know there's not very many jobs, so I moved into more of the student services end of education. Okay. And so I ran residence halls for several years. I worked with student groups and building student leadership, planning events. And then And then my parents died.
Mm.
I was 23 when they died, and so I had to take a step back from what I thought was going to be a career in student affairs, and came back home and worked with my sister, and she was a couple of years younger, so helping her get settled a little bit.
Yeah.
And got to work back in student affairs. A few more life changes along the way, and then I started to think, well, what is it I really want to do? I'm in my late 20s. I need to start kind of figuring out a direction and a path. And I realized that it was the teaching piece. It was that educating piece. And I love kids, but I'm not great with a group of 30 of them.
Yeah.
I can't talk back to them the way you can adults.
No.
So I went back to school, earned my master's degree in adult ed. At the same time, I started working on the academics end in education. I worked for a college system back home and kind of worked my way up through the academic ranks, faculty, program director, associate dean, dean of instruction. And at the same time, I was also working on my doctorate in urban adult education. Mm. When I was finished with that, my husband and I were just both at kind of a crossroads where do I want to go with my career? Where did he want to go? My family was scattered all over the country. We had adopted our kids a couple of years before that. And he's from Omaha. Mm-hmm. And he's number 8 of 10 in the kid line. So the thought of having aunts and uncles and cousins to help and be part of was very appealing. Mm-hmm. So it took a little time, found a position here, and moved from Wisconsin to Nebraska, and we've been here ever since.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry you lost your parents at such a young age, but obviously that had a very transformative effect on you and helping you kind of guide you in a direction you may not have taken had that not occurred at that time. And so, like you said, all roads lead to here, and being the educator side is something that the Alliance was missing a little bit. Our founder, Dr. Bev Crocker, obviously an educator right there from Creighton University, definitely one of the best. When she left, we brought on Michael Robinson, who was in your position, who was a fantastic executive director, but he would be the first to tell you he's not an educator. He's much more of a connector, like you're mentioning, right? The relationship side, which is very important for anybody who's in that role. But now you've kind of brought that little sprinkle back to it, which is nice to see, and it has been enjoyable, if I could say, over the past couple of years.
Absolutely. When I moved to Omaha, it was to be in the education field, and I've been at a few different institutions in the last 10 years. I think what kind of helped make a connection with me about the Alliance is that when I first moved to Omaha, I was looking to meet people and looking to network, and one of the first events that I attended was an Alliance luncheon. I was like, wow, this is really kind of cool. People are talking about things that are important to me too. Right. And ironically, I came in late to that one event and kind of had just sat down, and the person next to me, we just started talking and we exchanged business cards. And on the back of the business card, side tip for everyone, write down where you met the person on the back of the business card. That way you'll never forget.
Yeah.
And so I did that. And lots of things happened, and I think I maybe went to one or two more. So when I ran into an ethical issue at an employer, and that relationship did not work out for obvious reasons, I needed to stand up and say something that was impacting a large portion of my team. And I had put out some resumes, and one of them was to the Business Ethics Alliance. My predecessor, not as an executive director, but in the VP role that I had originally applied for, had left. And so I had applied for that position thinking, okay, well, this relationship didn't work out, but I'm great at educating and leadership development, and this will be great. It's a good match. So 3 days after the relationship did not work out, I got a call from Mike Robinson. And Mike had said, well, I need to make some decisions somewhat quickly. Okay. Do you have some time to talk? As I'm giggling to myself, yes, I have plenty of time to talk, right?
Absolutely.
And so we talked that afternoon, and he said, well, I'd really like to meet you. I want to get to know you a little bit more, kind of look you in the eye, just get a sense of who you are. And he said, I see you're remote. I said, well, I'm actually not. I'm Omaha based. He goes, oh, great. So we were going to meet at a coffee shop. Well, that coffee shop closed a little early that day. So he says, I'll meet you at the Mark at the time, which is now the Bolero. I'm like, oh, okay. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, what do you wear to a bowling alley interview?
Yeah.
Am I bringing out my bowling shoes and jeans and a sweatshirt? And, figured it out, of course. And we talked for a good hour and a half that night. And the offer came pretty much instantaneously. Thus started my coming back to the Alliance. So it feels, kind of like a full circle. And then I pulled out my business cards and I saw the card of the woman I was sitting next to because I'd, again, written where I'd met. The person was Madeline Moyer.
Oh, wow. Yeah, Madeline's fantastic.
Madeline's amazing. She was working for the Kroc Center at the time. And now, in an amazing twist of fate, she is the vice board chair for the Alliance. And so I really do believe that all roads kind of lead back to where we need to be.
Yeah, and that community piece, right? Because you mentioned coming to Omaha because you had the extended family, but the business community needs to be its own family and its own helping hand to one another, right?
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I hadn't, up until now, Blake, I hadn't thought of it quite that way. To me, a community is probably like my definition of family because my own family has been so positively touched by adoption that I have a very broad view of what family is. And even when my own parents passed, my extended family became my nuclear family. My friends' parents became my nuclear family. So I never felt alone because I always had this family community. And I think in many ways, that's what draws people to the Business Ethics Alliance too, is wanting to connect with others who are like-minded, who can come to learn a few really good nuggets. And that's where I think as an educator, I can certainly help dig those nuggets out. I can help find articles and resources, and I can find people who are experts. We can't all be experts in everything.
Yeah.
So we bring in expert speakers and they can help share wisdom. And then as a lifelong educator, I think I've got a reasonably good grasp of how to help coordinate and present that to what I hope is engaging. And then I hope, the people who were at the events tell at least one other person. It's like each one reach one.
Yeah, right.
And then we continue to build that ethical community, that the business leaders, our nonprofit leaders, the up-and-coming leaders, and the real business ethics, the behaviors happen in how organizations conduct their business. It's not tax status.
Yeah, right.
It's how they work, what they need to do.
Yeah, and there's, you made the point yesterday at one point during the conversation that the buck kind of starts and ends at the top. And so it's one thing to say, let's get the group of the CEOs together. Let's all talk about what we think here in this room. But it's important to include everybody in those conversations. And especially if you want to better understand how your employees feel, what is important to them. Are your values all aligned in that space? Do your values need to maybe update a little bit to adhere to the change in their demographic that you've been employing throughout the years? And so the Alliance allows a place for everybody to be involved in that conversation and different viewpoints to come together as well, because it's important to have, people on both sides, maybe not of every topic, but certainly the vast majority of them. And one that always stands out to me is when First National Bank stopped doing business with the NRA for credit cards. And, I maybe had one belief on the matter, and a lot of other people around us had the same belief, but one gentleman had a different belief. And I'll tell you what, he made probably the best argument out of everybody there and helped change my opinion on it a little bit. Now, I don't judge, First National for what they did in that sense, but it's important to think of it through multiple lenses. Right. And so there is no black and white with ethics. Right. And there's certainly some things you can look on and say, that was unethical, absolutely. But each company and each person has to make the decisions based on their own personal beliefs, their own goals, values, their own family, community, and the business community being together as one, not competing against each other at all times, being at each other's throats, is going to allow for that to be those ethical choices to kind of radiate through our community, which I think that the Omaha business community is fantastic and unique in that sense.
And you mentioned something, and and I alluded to this yesterday in our presentation, is that the ethics are the behaviors, right? So they're the outward signs that someone is acting in an ethical manner. Ethics themselves are not a belief. It's not a moral. It's not a value. It's how we express those beliefs and morals and values. So it's hard to say, well, somebody has ethics. Well, okay, because ethics can be unethical, right? Yeah. Ideally, they should be positive and contribute to the good. Mm-hmm. But it's how we express those values, how we express those morals. It's how we express those beliefs. I think that's where the ethical behavior really comes in. And that's what at the Alliance we're trying to help organizations do, is not to say you need to do it this way, right? We're not that judgy person making the determination you're ethical or you're unethical. We might think that, and we might point out different perspectives. But the organization and the leaders of the organization from top to bottom have to be the ones to say, this is what we value, these are our beliefs, and this is how we are going to conduct our business. And we're going to do so, if they so choose, in this manner which we believe to be ethical. And so we can come in and we can have that conversation with them to say, love it, great, wonderful. Have you considered X? Mm-hmm. Have you considered Y? We're not so sure about Z.
Right.
So that we're not, again, saying the should, could, would. It's let's think about. And so we provide that. This is a little cliche, but we provide that safe space for tough conversations to happen.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, a lot of people talk about, providing a safe space. It's almost been overused at this point, but the Alliance was doing that for a very, very long time.
Right.
And allowing different opinions to come together and still having respect for one another and what these people have created. Because when you're at an event with the Alliance, you don't know if you're going to be sitting next to the CEO of some now publicly traded company, a very large organization, or just a small business owner who is just grinding right now trying to get something off the ground.
Right.
And do you suppose the individual who manages the larger corporation, are their opinions more important than the other? Probably their decisions and opinions are probably a little bit more impactful right now, but those other individuals are one day they have an opportunity to be that person. And so to learn from them now and to also maybe educate the people who have been there a little bit about what the future holds is an important aspect that the Alliance kind of melds together.
That's a good point. And one thing to keep in mind is that, that CEO of that, let's just say, multinational corporation, the environment and the ecosystem in which they operate and think and work is a lot different than the ecosystem in which that small business owner, it's just the level of impact and the type of impact. I would hesitate to say that anyone is more important than another because the impact is going to be different. So I have this conversation, with my family periodically where they'll say, well, you should be concerned about this issue because X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I can see the logic, and other times I go, well, okay, but what's more important, this, or I need to spend some time with my son or my daughter or my husband or my dogs for that matter, right? And that's my immediate need right now because they need me right now. So we're always weighing and making choices about where the most positive impact is going to happen. And then also what we can let go and what we say, I don't really need to get involved with that. Yeah. And even at the Alliance, we've had to make some choices about programming, where we've gone into maybe some broader topics that tangentially related to ethics, but the connection wasn't as strong. Mm-hmm. And there have been other times when we've needed to really pull back and to say, okay, we have done that. It wasn't quite working. It wasn't as strongly connected ethics. We need to come back to our core mission of providing positive, practical business ethics education. And that's what our core is going to be. So we're always making choices.
Absolutely. And that's a great way to lead into, the future of the Alliance, obviously. And so you're a couple years in now, so you've had some time to get your feet wet. You're feeling more comfortable. And you've mentioned that the topic for this year is going to be authenticity, right? I believe you said was it Webster's Word of the Year?
Webster's 2023 Word of the Year.
Very much something that maybe is getting, to your point, is it overused sometimes in cases online where you're pretending like, oh, well, this is authentic. You're just kind of branding yourself as authentic when in reality, maybe it's not. So we're trying to take a real hard focus on being authentic. What does that mean, and especially in the business sense? So can you elaborate a little bit more on, why is that the topic that the Alliance chose, and what can we expect from, the educational and programming pieces that are going to come from that topic?
You bet. Originally, the topic was going to be very focused on AI. And I had made a semi-public announcement at our trustees meeting. And after the meeting, received a little bit of feedback that AI was absolutely on top of everybody's minds. It's relevant. We definitely needed to, we couldn't just let that go. But it might have been just a little too limiting in terms of people perceiving it as being very technical, which wasn't what I had in mind. And so I took the advice and spent some time thinking about it, and being the English major nerd that I am and love, I was looking at some articles, and the first dictionary that was starting to have their word of the year was the Oxford English Dictionary, and their word of the year was Riz.
Right.
And after I asked my son what that meant, because it was obvious it was not in my lexicon.
Yeah, I just learned this yesterday as well. So,
and for those of you who don't know what Riz is, it's short for charisma, but taken up about 12 notches.
Fantastic. What a word.
It's a great word.
Yeah.
But it's not the word that I was looking for the Alliance. And the next day, Merriam-Webster came out with their 2023 Word of the Year, which was authentic. And their rationale for that was exactly what you were saying, is that so many people are using that term and bandying it about without really understanding the implications. When we say we are authentic, what does it really mean? It can be defined many different ways. Most of us think of it as real or very straightforward, and it can mean so much more. Well, when we have deep fakes, when we have brand awareness, when we have name, image, likeness issues, when we have artificial intelligence, all of these other kinds of negative influencers, maybe, the meaning of what it is to be authentic, truly authentic, it's kind of a big mixed up mishmash now. And so with ethics, taking a look at what it means to be authentic. Yesterday we talked about the regulation of AI. Well, there's many ways you can look at that. AI has been doing some wonderful things. It saves time, it's efficient, it helps to process large amounts of data, but it's only as good as the people who process it and design AI and test it and implement it. So where's the authenticity in it? If somebody's creating deep fakes, and some of the Facebook memes that I see, right, with photoshopping are just hilarious. And I know darn well they're not authentic, but then I will hear people talk about it. It's like, oh, did you see that? And misinformation. And again, this is the educator in me, and I've supervised librarians before, and I go, oh my goodness, are you kidding me? And so then having to bring that conversation around to ultimately, how do you know? How can you trust that? How can you know that a source you're using for information is credible? And I think it's the same thing with ethics and ethical behavior. There's trust in a relationship. There is confidence that the resources are well vetted. There is an expectation of stability over time, and the ability to have difficult conversations about topics which you're probably going to disagree on at some point. But to know that, as you said, there will be that respect. There will be the ability to listen to another's voice and perspective, that there will be representation in those thoughts. And so that's where I go back to that authenticity, that authentic piece. I mean, I'm a wife, I'm a mom, I'm a sister, I'm a cousin, I take Taekwondo lessons, I'm a Girl Scout troop leader, I love my dogs, I walk them all the time. there's so many different facets of me.
Mm-hmm.
They're all me.
Mm-hmm.
So am I being inauthentic when I put on my suit and dress up and host a big event? No, because that's just part of who I am. If I'm in a pair of jogging shorts and a tank top, taking the dogs out for a walk on 90-degree day, looking a little bit like a sweaty rat, that's me too.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just being very, I think, true to who we are, whether it's individually or whether it's through the organizations we run.
Yeah, and there's, a lot to unpack there, and there's going to be a lot over these coming years. I don't know. Everybody says that this year is more important, the most important one that's ever come along, right? Every year, that's the story that comes out, and there's a battle within our nation. I mean, obviously, information is shared faster than it has ever been shared before. Right. We're adapting to these things. We're reacting to misinformation. We are now, COVID was such a huge shift for us all. And we're still feeling the ramifications of that and the communities that were torn apart because of it. And I don't mean any one group of individuals. I mean, everybody's own community, whatever that was before, it was separated somehow, right? And the Alliance, I think that you would notice that the groups of people coming together for the events, they lessened, right? There's fewer and fewer people attending. Maybe some of the trustees who were really involved at one time were stepping away, right? And it's hard to get these people engaged again to say, hey, we still need to be a part of this community. We need to all come together and work together. So that side of it is going to be interesting because the authenticity of it all and how you decide to move forward and come evolve from this, horrifying thing that was COVID is going to really impact what our society looks like moving forward. And I think that businesses are at the root of so much of this because you employ people, obviously, in the economy. Your employees that you do employ, their happiness is going to have a huge impact on just your overall interactions. If you're going through a drive-through, Scooter's Coffee, one of their core values about smiling, being happy and whatnot, that's not something you get everywhere you go. Right? Somebody who can't wait to actually do their job, whatever that may be. There's pleasantries and things like that have kind of subsided because we stopped communicating together so much during that time. And so what do you think is important for us as a community and specifically, from a business sense? How can we all move past that? And how can we actually, I don't think we're ever going to get back to what it was because what it was is here and gone. Right. But whatever it is newly, whatever this is going to become, what are some important things that these leaders should be thinking about as they're trying to harness their culture again and also interact with the greater community, whatever that would be, Omaha or the world or wherever city they're in? What are some pieces these leaders should focus on to help and get back, those pieces that we've lost?
Wow, you're asking me to solve the world's problems here.
I am. Come on, world hunger's next. So.
I don't, oh boy.
Yeah.
I can cook, but that is a great question. There are maybe two trains of thoughts that are spinning around in this hamster wheel mind of mine, and both of them have come from colleagues that I was fortunate enough to sit down and spend an hour with. And both of these colleagues are, I think, people that, as a woman and as a leader, I've looked up to and now I'm learning from. And both of them have been longtime supporters of the Alliance. So the first instance that's coming to mind is, and they're both related to communication. So I think that's my short, if we could emphasize one thing about ethics, what is it? It's communication. That's a huge piece of it. The first colleague had talked about messaging and the messages we send about what we get involved in, advocate for, or what we need to pull back from. She was talking about when the Israeli and Palestine war and conflict started up again. And in October, some of the people at the organization were expecting her to make some very big pronouncements and say, this is where we stand and this is what we believe. And what she had said is there's lots of things to consider when you are faced with a choice. And so some questions that she asks herself to guide a response, because it's very easy to just put out a response. Yeah. It's much harder to think about how is that response necessarily going to impact others. So she says, I think about, are we in the space in which whatever the issue is happening? Mm. If we're not in the space now, will we be in that space? Mm. And then how will this directly impact our organization and our team? And if there's a really good center point to that says, yes, we're involved, or if we're not involved now, we will be involved, and this is going to directly impact my team, then there's more of an impetus to put out some communication about whatever that issue is and the organization's involvement, whether it's support or, I don't want to say ignorance, but maybe just taking a step back from it and not being as out front and as much of an advocate.
Right.
So that really kind of stuck with me, those guiding questions. The other thing is today, the colleague I was talking about, she talked about one of the things that the pandemic did take away from us is the ability to communicate effectively in person. Mm-hmm. We've gotten quite good at communicating via Zoom or email, asynchronously, and yet it has its risks because, as she pointed out, we've had a hard time just even finding a time for the two of us to connect, to get to know each other. But through our meeting this morning, we were able to talk about so much more and learn so much more about each other and talk more deeply engaging than we have in a whole year's worth of back and forth asynchronous communication. And so that's what I see happening with the Alliance is, people were naturally hesitant to want to get together in big crowds. And it's taken time for people to see the value of coming back in person. Mm. I think that's where some of the topic of exploring something like AI is really helpful. It's a tool, and we just need to remember that AI is a tool. It's not going to take over our house. It's not going to nurture us when we need comforting. It's not going to be able to make the ethical decisions that we as human beings do. Mm-hmm. We do that through our connections as human beings. We do that when we can talk to each other. Mm-hmm. We do that when we can talk with colleagues about how did you handle this situation? What do I need to keep in mind for that situation? Mm. And so that's what I'm hoping is to get us back to maybe not pre-pandemic, because you're right, that's gone. Mm-hmm. We can't go back there. But what can a post-pandemic that's a couple years out now look like?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also the communication piece and what we can move toward. Mm-hmm. It's so easy to be negative.
Yes.
I think that it doesn't take any bravery or courage to sit back and have a negative view on the outlook of the world. And if that's what you think we're heading toward and that's what you decide to focus on, well, I guess good luck to you. And I think that it takes courage, authenticity to truly look at a situation that is frightening and decide that we're going to overcome this and we're going to be better off because of it. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's Henry Ford who said, if I asked the customers what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And so it's like, but what? Everyone drives a car now, right? And so are there risks that come along with these advancements? And are there really serious questions that we should consider? Absolutely. Yeah. But to pretend like this is just the end or that there's no hope. I mean, goodness gracious, I'll bet you if we were to go back to the presidential elections in any time in period, there was just doom and gloom coming from both sides. If somebody got elected, oh my goodness, you don't know what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. It's all over. But I think at the end of the day, it's all about the people who are a part of this country, a part of this community, a part of the global world, and how we interact with each other and how we care for one another, that really makes the difference. And it's interesting because, of course, me being in finance, a lot of my clients want to talk about whether it be in the market or out of the market because of who's going to be elected. If you look at market performance during Democratic and Republican leadership, you'd be surprised to find out it's incredibly equal.
Okay.
There's actually less than a 0.5% difference in the S&P 500 performance, depending on which leadership is in office. I'm not going to talk about who's outperforms the other one, because then people think I'm taking a side. But you'd be surprised it's not the one you think. But because of that, that's what the message I always try to preach to people. It's like, guess what? These companies, they have a job, and their job is not to adhere to what the powers that be necessarily are advocating for, or what they want. It is to provide value back to their shareholders, or in your case, where you're a privately held company, it is obviously providing value to your customers, but also to your employees, and making sure they're taken care of and the community that you serve is taken care of. And that's not going to change.
No.
Right?
No, not at all. I think whereas as human beings, where we sometimes get hung up with communication is when communication goes to extremes. So you were talking about the presidential election. How many times have we heard the future of democracy rests upon this election?
Goodness, every time.
Every time, right? Well, over 200 years, if we're saying that every single time, are we saying that one party has it right over the other? No. Or, when we say, oh my God, this is the sky is falling, or, this candidate can't think past the end of their nose, or whatever it is. I remember having this conversation with several people, and this is the other comms part of me coming out, is remember the source of the message and tear apart the message a little bit. So if you see on, some news channel, oh my gosh, and the end is near, and this is going to happen, and this is the candidate who's going to save us all. Well, what's the motivation behind that? They want to draw viewers. Why? Because their sponsors want viewers to buy their products. Why? Well, geez, it's not so much about reporting news accurately then, it's about money.
Right.
And it's about making decisions that are going to generate money. And so then when you start to tear apart some of that messaging, the emotion drains out of that messaging, and the rational part of the brain can kick in a little bit, so that values and morals and beliefs have a better chance of being based both on faith and emotion as well as logic and rationale.
Yeah.
Whereas I think our brains get hijacked when we see these extreme messages. I will tell you that as soon as I see a message that is using a lot of extreme language, I automatically walk away. I turn it off. I'm like, nope, not buying into that, so that my emotions have a chance to go, it's okay.
Right. Yeah, and view everything from multiple angles. And with the communication piece, I think that you going with authentic as the theme for the year was the right choice. And
Thank you.
I think if let's take, for instance, a very, very common, heavy topic that was leaned into over the past several years, and with good reason, is obviously inclusion, DEI, things of that nature. Well, if you were to choose that as the only topic, then there you are pigeonholed into making sure everything is there. But the topic of inclusion is very much a part of being authentic. And when you talk to people who are experts in the field, a lot of times they say, hey, you can hire whatever coordinator you want, but they're not going to fix your terrible culture if it's not inclusive to begin with.
Right.
So it's like, that's a part of your authentic communication you have to be able to have to be able to actually meet those goals. I mean, on the topic of AI yesterday, they were talking about people trying to program artificial intelligence to sift through resumes to try to shorten up the job application process. And they found their own company's bias was feeding into that AI. And it was, leaving out a huge group and parts of society that have historically not been included. Go figure. And because you used that past information to do it. So what do you think? What did you take away from some of that conversation? And like you mentioned, the human aspect is going to be so important in AI. I didn't feel like there was certainly some caution from the panelists. There was certainly not everything was, rosy and going to be perfect. I think it's a rocky road ahead of us. But what were your takeaways from some of the topics they brought up about artificial intelligence and the human involvement that's going to be so important that we go about this the right way?
The first takeaway I had actually came from our signature event in August when we had Dr. Kathy Meyer-Halstern from Google. She's the director of their responsible AI department. She helped to come in and I think demystify is a good word for this, what AI is and what AI is not. So that was a big takeaway, that AI is not, the word she used was sentient. So it can't feel emotions and it can't think in the way that a human being can. So the idea that AI is going to take over the world and we're all going to be subject to its whims is really not going to happen. That behind AI is a person. And it's the person who programs and writes the software. It is a person who tests and implements. It is a person who uses. And so if we're looking for accountability, it falls on us as people. And that message was reinforced yesterday, that if we're going to use AI and we're injecting our own biases and discrimination into it, it's on us. If we are going to let it's not a brand new technology, right? Because AI has actually been around for decades.
Right.
Just in different forms. But if the advances in AI are coming so fast because the technology is developing faster and faster, then we need to have some guidelines to say, this is an ethical use of AI, this is an unethical use of AI. And again, it goes back to the people. So I'm drawn to and remembering the quote I shared yesterday, and it's too long to word for word it right now. But the gist of the quote was that AI cannot determine ethical behavior. It can provide insight, it can gather information, it can, I would say, provide some resources, but ethical behavior is determined by people. And Blake, you were the only one who knew the source of that quote. And where did that quote come from?
ChatGPT. There you go.
When we as a panelist were talking about how we were envisioning the flow, somebody said we should put this question to AI.
Yeah.
And so I did. And that's what it came up with. Even AI is telling us it can't determine ethical behavior. That's up to us as people.
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking the same as the conversation was evolving. So the opening, member from Coley Jessen who came up and spoke, he mentioned Ryan Holiday, who was a Stoic author. And then I was thinking, can you plug in ethics to AI? Well, you'd have to teach it which ethics to complement. So if you chose, I'm going to put Marcus Aurelius in here, those ethics are probably going to be different than if you decide, okay, let's do Deepak Chopra.
Right.
And try to blend those together. Right. They're very even though they might have a lot of similarity in topic, I think that you're going to have some tension between that. So I was like, well, who decides the ethics? Right. And that's why the human brain and human intelligence is unlike anything we've ever seen. We don't understand it. Yeah. The capability of human ingenuity has no bounds yet. Right. There hasn't been a limit on what we've been able to create at this point. Every time we think there's a limit, somebody comes out with something else, and it's almost as if scarcity drives that kind of human creativity. And whatever these, hopefully that's what AI will help solve, is some of these scarcity issues that we have. So I want to kind of end with, we've talked a lot about the community of the Alliance, what we're doing to try to build that back together, the topics we're going to be covering this year, but a huge part of the Alliance are our trustees, right? And the trustees who support the Alliance, who are involved in it. So can you talk a little bit about what you found, what you believe that the role of trustees play in an organization like the Alliance? Because some people might think it starts and ends with writing a check. I'm guessing you don't think that's the case. And also just a little bit about what you hope to see from involvement from the trustees. If you were to picture your perfect trustee, how they interact with you, the community, the Alliance, what does that look like?
The best word I can think of to describe what a trustee does in a single word is an ambassador. A trustee whether it's an individual trustee or in some cases maybe in a large organization, there might be some organizational trustees, is to spread the word of what we do at the Alliance to not only their own organizations, but to their own networks, to the greater community, colleagues in other areas, to say, this is what we're doing here. We're building an ethical community. And these are the discussions we have, and these are the resources we take advantage of in a good way, of course. And this is where I've chosen, or our organization has chosen to throw their support behind. So we have some trustees and some organizations who are what we call our mission drivers, and they're the ones who kind of provide, they do provide unrestricted operating support. Use this gift, whatever you need it for. There are other trustees who maybe are with much smaller organizations and they can't provide financial support at that level. So they might instead say, but I've got a talent and I am happy to help facilitate a session, or I've got a space that I have access to and you're welcome to use this space for low or no charge. And others maybe don't even have that, but they're like, well, I'm pretty well networked though. I'm happy to spread the word and I'm happy to keep bringing people to the events, and I'm happy to maybe suggest a speaker or sit on a committee. So what a trustee does is they advocate for us in time, talent, treasure. And there are some trustees who have been with us for the very beginning. I am grateful beyond belief for their unending support. We would not be here without them. There are other trustees who are newer, like, well, how do I get involved? I don't have much time, or can I just volunteer for this? Or, I do that. I'm happy to help. All of which we say thank you and yes. Come be part of this ethical community.
Right. And is it important to you to have openness for, all trustees? Like, for instance, Coley Jessen is a law firm who supported the event yesterday, supported many events, and they're some great supporters in town. They support Keep Nebraska Beautiful as well, another organization I'm with, very thankful for that. But I know you also have Dvorak Law Firm, another great law firm in town who have supported events. I know that David Mayer has sat as the chair of the board, at times. So it's you have they're competitors. They're direct competitors, I'm sure, if you were to ask them, right? Yeah. But they both are trustees. They both are involved. Is that something that's important to the Alliance, is to not have any kind of a preference over one business or another? Is that something that you make sure to be intentional about? If I come to you and say, well, I'm going to give you this huge check, which, goodness gracious, I'm sure you would love to have someone come and offer you a huge check, but here are my stipulations to it. I want you to not allow this other person to headline an event. Is that something you would allow, or is that an ethical line for you?
That is a great question. I would say that if somebody is offering a resource, but a condition of it automatically excludes another from being part of the conversation and being part of a community, I would be hard pressed to accept that, to be very honest. And I mean, my background as an educator, in particular as an urban educator, I've got a soft spot for those who have not been part of a conversation before, whose voices and perspectives have not been represented at the table, and who don't feel like they belong. We work not just with the law firms that you mentioned, but we work with 5 or 6, maybe 7 or 10 other law firms. Who's to say that anyone has the corner on X or Y or Z? All of them have value. All of them bring something to the discussion. I started Tai Chi about 3 weeks ago, and at the end of every class, our teacher says, thank you for the gift of yourself, because if you weren't here today, the energy in the class would be different. And it took me a few minutes to be like, well, I don't know that that's true, but that really is. So if another, in any industry, if one organization said, well, we're only going to participate if that organization doesn't, I'm not sure. I would go back to that organization and say, well, what's the reason for that?
Yeah.
What is the reasoning? Because you bring a valuable perspective and this other organization brings a valuable perspective. So are you asking me to choose? Are you giving me an ultimatum?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's like my kids, right? Who do you love more? You're a parent.
Right.
You're going to get that one.
Uh-huh.
And it's not that you love one or value one more than the other. Yeah. You value the gifts that everybody brings.
Right.
And so I'd be hard pressed. Thankfully, I haven't had that come up yet. I've heard from other organizations that it does happen, though.
Yeah.
And I go, wow, not on my watch.
Yeah. Well, hey, I just asked that to showcase just what the inclusivity of the BEA is. Yeah. Who's invited? Everybody's invited.
Everybody.
And it's fantastic that you have taken over at the helm, done a great job. I think that the programming it has been fantastic. And I wish you the best of luck, obviously. And I can't wait to have you on at a later time to discuss all the great things the Alliance has done. And for everybody out there who, if you listen to the podcast, you're probably involved with the Alliance to a very high extent. Maybe not. Maybe you've just tuned in because you've seen it shared on LinkedIn, Facebook, things like that. Where should they go if they want to learn more about the Alliance? What is the best spot for people who maybe want to get more involved? How should they reach out? What do you recommend?
There are many ways. Again, it kind of goes back to there's no one right way, right? Yeah. Everybody's going to access information slightly differently. I mean, Blake, what you do here with the podcast is incredible. We are so grateful that you give of your time and your talents to help make this one way, right?
Thank you.
Incredible. And I've had so much fun here today, so thank you. Christy Anderson with The Sweet Life, right, is another way. Some people are a little bit maybe more visual and they want to see their favorite CEO talking about their sweet life. Mm-hmm. Our website, we are making great strides to keep it dynamic and update it and provide good information. Eventually we'll start putting some of the past booklets up there so people can see, oh, they talked about this, and oh, I really need to go to this one. Mm-hmm. Come to an event. If you don't want to come alone, come with somebody you know. Bring a friend. Mm-hmm. Stop by the office. We're in the Heider College of Business in the Harper Center. There's so many ways. Reach out and, just contact us.
Yeah.
So many ways. So
absolutely.
If you're at all curious, come and check it out. Best thing I can think of.
And the links will be in however you're taking in this podcast. Go to the About section. You'll be able to find a way to get in touch with Anne-Marie or her team. But thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And Anne-Marie, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Appreciate it.
You
awesome.
Bet.